We'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. The first item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is public comment. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? Any public comments? If not, we'll move on. For the record, both Supervisor Zhang and Marshall have indicated that they would be a few minutes late, but will be joining us shortly. Next item is approval of the minutes of the June 21st meeting. They were in the packet. What are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Leahy. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll go to educational presentations, county budgeting process overview. Christy. Now Lance made a comment earlier that said that this may be one of the first meetings where he doesn't have to say anything. So let's see. The challenge has been.
Okay, I'm going to up that challenge with another one saying that this is a budget process and the finance director isn't even going to say anything bad. She's going to give you all happy information today. So that's a change too. Let's see if we can both live up to our high expectations. Today we're just going to go over a budget overview. And usually what I do is I do a 5-year proposal and I come up with a lot of doom and gloom and say it's going to be a terrible budget and we have all these bad things going on. And yeah, we do that all the time. But this year what we're going to do is talk to you a little bit about what's really different and what really are impacts we don't have an answer for you this time. We're going to ask you to help us with flexibility and coming up with ways to deal with things that are brand new to some of you. And for those of you that remember back to the early 80s, inflation numbers just came out today. Inflation's at 9.1%, which has not been seen since 1981. So this budget presentation, little overview, is going to be a little bit different than the usual ones. We're going to talk about some things that worry us. We're going to talk about some things that are a challenge that are new to us here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to work on getting to you a balanced budget in October. So that's what we'll be doing, is providing this committee a balanced budget based on all the factors that are the normal ones that we have, plus some of the new things that we've had to, are going to be dealing with as a challenge coming up in the current year and for at least the near future. So with that, we'll go on. And I'm going to also make sure that I don't say anything that would have our county minister Leonard need to chime in. So I'm going to stick to my script, and we're going to be just fine. These are actually the ones that we have, that we actually have taken a look at or concerned, and I'm not saying that it's going to really affect the budget, but it's going to affect it in some ways, and I'm going to tell you the things that we track and monitor to see where we're at any given time of the year and when we're putting the budget together that are going to impact us. First one is inflation, and at the time this was created, we didn't have that number. It came out this morning at 9.1, and yes, you can look at it the glass half full or the glass half empty. It's half full because gas prices have been going down over the last 30 days. But it is also the highest rate that we've had in a while. Fuel costs do not impact inflation or general food costs, general living costs as much as they did in the 70s when there was high gas prices, because the impact on those overall has been somewhat mitigated from those days, but it's still very big a concern, and I don't think even having moderated those fuel prices in the last 30 days really will significantly tamper our inflation concerns. How do we look at that in the budget for you? We look at the fact that we are reliant on sales tax for a major part of our revenue stream. And we'll show you, we actually have the sales tax chart, which I put in your packet each month for information. I also added it here. Durable goods sales are down. People are not buying the refrigerators and they aren't buying the large items anymore. They've had articles, have you seen at Target and some other place, Amazon, trying to liquidate those durable goods at a lower price. So that's the sales tax side. Not that we're buying the durable goods, but that we would receive the sales tax on vehicle sales. There are also durable goods and those types of things. On the flip side, we're looking at the expenditures, and that includes the higher fuel and utility cost. And so we need to accommodate for those in our budget for the gas, fuel, and utilities. So that's one item. One of the ways that we do look at that and are concerned is by tracking our sales tax revenue on that side of the budget, and that's one of the key items that we look at, and it will be a revenue budget assumption that we'll bring to you at our next meeting in July. So we've got some estimates, but I think instead of bringing you ones that we changed, because we would have brought you ones before we knew that inflation number today, then we would have changed it right away. I would have guaranteed you it would have been different maybe a little bit by the time you would have looked at them again in 2 weeks. And so that's one that we haven't seen in a long time. The other one that's actually new is employee recruitment and retention, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this today or have Molly do a presentation, but we need to make you aware that our employee turnover is an all-time high, with a majority of our employees saying that they're leaving due to wage and benefits. Employee benefit, this is one that we talk about in each of our budget messages. Employee benefit costs are increasing, and they are not sustainable. And we're looking at is health insurance cost. The increase in health insurance costs have exceeded our net new construction annually and may have been at or lower than that in maybe the last 8 years, but not. So we're really looking at pressures, particularly on the health insurance and other benefit costs for managing that in the budget, so the wage and benefit packages together. Usually we talk a little bit about wages, but we don't talk about retention. And we do talk a little bit about the benefit increases, but this has really been going to be solidified with the fact that we are having a hard time keeping people. When I had started here 20 years ago, most of the people that I knew were working here and worked here as long as I had. And I can tell you, I have two of us in my department. One of my employees has 25 years. I have a little over 20, and I'm hoping to keep my staff to have that same amount of time, but that may not necessarily be the goals of all the employees that are here. Even if it is, we're seeing that we aren't able to overcome some of those struggles. So that's enough on that, but just to let you know, that is something new we have not really ever had to deal with before. And what we're asking of you today is just the need to help us have the flexibility and the organizational re-engineering. It's going to be critical for us to navigate this environment, both on a human and financial resource perspective, because we have limited employees resources and we're going to have limited financial resources. And instead of coming up with things that we need to figure out, we will try to figure those out together. But one of the things that we've found, because every year seems to be a new crisis, before COVID, it was the opioid crisis. That was a huge crisis for us that we had to take money off fund balance to try to get programs together. Then we had the COVID crisis. And now we're having employee retention and recruitment crisis. And what we've found in all of those items is that if you allow us to work with you to become flexible and figure out new ways of doing things, that's been really helpful to us to be able to do something without having to go back and have doom and gloom and collapse. We've been able to, in the budget crisis through COVID, put a mid-year plan together so that we could structure it through there. Fortunately, on top of that, besides cutting some of the things that we knew we weren't going to use, we didn't do training because we couldn't leave. We were home or working remotely or here. That allowed us to figure out how to manage through that crisis. Before that, with the opioid crisis, we again had come up with plans so that we could try to get ahead of that struggle. I think that's been increased a little bit more due to the COVID situation, isolation. So we're asking that of you. Help us be flexible. Help us when we come up with ways to try to re-engineer what we're doing so that we can manage a budget in these types of times. So we're not good at crisis. We don't like them, but we've found that we are able to pull together and get through them as well. With that, let's now we're going to go into some, so that's kind of where we're at right now with the budget and what we're kind of looking at for you. Again, we'll come back at the end of July with some of our budget assumptions. But what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about local levy limits. So there's a statute that's local levy limits, and I just put a few excerpts that are really important to us here. Levy limit is, you can read it for yourself. What it is that you have an operating levy limit and a debt levy limit. And the operating levy limit is fixed at the previous year's limit, except for an increase that you can have in net new construction. And so I put that down there, which is the valuation factor. They don't call it net new construction right there. They call it the valuation factor, but that is the net new construction for that year as of January 1st. And that's anything that gets built minus anything that gets torn down. And so that's what it is. For the counties, it does include TID values. So net new construction does include any increase in property values that include TIDs. Now, when we go to, when I talk a little bit later about equalized value, TID valuation is not included in that for our tax rate calculation. So TIDs are a little different. TIDs are in for net new construction. TID value is out when we use the equalized value for our tax rate calculation. So that's a really important thing. So that's one of the rules we have. You cannot go over your levy limit. And we have different ones that we calculate operating and debt. And as you see in this paragraph, it says that it may not include amounts which are subject to sub 3, sub E, 8. And you say, well, what would that be? What is not included? Well, we have items that are, 3 of these 4 are not included in the levy limit, and they are still taxable levy that we apportion out to a portion of the county. It may not be all of the county municipalities. So what are those? You have a levy limit. The amount of money you can levy, tax levy for operations is a limit. The amount of tax levy you can levy for debt is a limit. And then you can levy a tax for these other items which would not be subject to that, and we do. Or we could. Number one, we do not levy a tax for the County Children and Disability Education Board. We do have a Education and Disability Board here for Marathon County, and so their budget and their levy would pass through our county, but we do not levy a separate county tax for that, and we have not, at least ever since I've been here. But you could, so that would be one that would be germane to a county. Number 2, we are not a first-class city. I believe Milwaukee is, and I believe also Madison, based on population, is that would not apply to us. Number 3 does apply to us. The county can levy a tax for bridge and culvert repair, and we do, and that would be a separate levy, and you'll see a resolution that comes through on that one, September, and then it gets incorporated into your budget that you approve. And the last one is the amount of county levies to make payments to public libraries, and that one also would be a levy that is not subject to the operating limit, but it is subject to county board's approval in the annual budget. And with that, that is the fastest lesson on operating levies and county levy limits that you can have, and we will talk a little bit more as that budget gets put together and what those mean. Any question on that? I mean, just in general? Then I will move on. And with that, then what I wanted to do just briefly is do a little bit of math, because that's my favorite part of the budget, no matter if have lots of crisis or little crisis, as long as the math equals its to me, that's a win that day. So what we have is a levy limit and the tax levy and the tax rate. And you see that and you look and you'll see that the rate is higher than the levy itself, and then they kind of go this way. What happens is the levy is the total dollar amount of property tax levy that will be levied across all municipalities. The rate is a function of a fraction, and we'll talk about that late in just another slide. So you've got your tax levy, and the rate, and you'll see that the rate is going down over each of these years, except for that for 2022, and that is because we'll show you the next slide, which is the fraction that we use to calculate a rate, and we'll show you why that happens. So the two numbers that I wait for in August is equalized value. Well, actually, equalized value for apportionment of county taxes, which is the equalized value less the TID increment. So equalized value to you guys. And net new construction. We said net new construction is the amount of value that went in minus the amount of value that went down in property. What I need those for, and you can see, is I calculate, when I get those on August 15th from the Department of Revenue. And that are the two numbers I need to build what the tax levy maximums can be and what the tax rate can be. And they also provide a worksheet, and we have a form that we have to fill out and submit to the state. But with that, we can figure out where at least we are going to be. So we're going to start putting the budget together, and until we really have some of those solid numbers, then we really can get to a point where we have a goal. So if you would ask us today, where are you at with the budget or what's going on? Well, we can guess all we want, and that's what I'm doing on this worksheet. I'm guessing where I think that the levy, net new construction, and the equalized value is going to be. I don't know. I won't know, but I use historical rates plus some ancillary information, like on the real estate, how real estate's selling. Is it selling for more? Or is there a lot of construction going on? How are TID districts doing to get to these numbers? So that's why when we're fired up and ready to go in July, and then we kind of get excited and get things together, but then we really do start to wait until we can get some of our finalized numbers to really know where we're going to be when we're meeting with departments in September. So with that, you've got net new construction and equalized value, and you can see the green items that I am trying to come up with an estimate. This is your first view at a budget assumption because it's a very important one to us. You can see in the green levels 23 through 26, I'm trying to come up with what I believe net new construction could be when we get the actual one in from Department of Revenue, and I go a little conservative on that one. And you can see on the last rate column that the average net new construction over the last 8 years is 1.7%. And you can say, well, it's been going gangbusters, over 2 for the last 2. Yeah, but the problem is that it's only one part of my formula, and it's the amount that I can increase the levy. The bottom part of my formula to get a tax rate is the equalized value. And you can see over the course of time that that's definitely exceeded the net new construction. And that's the value of all property, new and old. And that over an 8-year average is 3.44%. So I'm estimating 2% for that over the next several years, and I'm estimating for 2023 a 1.35% net new construction. When you calculate the taxes, so that will give you a tax levy, and that will give you an equalized value. And like I said, these are numbers that are just going to start the conversation. So don't write that one down and say, well, this is where we're at. It just kind of gets us in a ballpark to see where we're at. But what you're going to see then is the tax rate is really a function of the green number right here divided by your equalized value. And so the tax rate goes down in years where if the numerator is going to be smaller and the denominator gets larger, it's really a function of the math. So if the numerator increases by a smaller ratio than the denominator, you're obviously going to have a lower tax rate, even if you increase the total amount of property taxes. So I don't want to make it real magical or anything. It's really just a function of the math that is created through that. And that was a really long explanation of that one. So with that, those are really the law and the how I have to work within my parameters, and just a little bit about how we start a budget. Any questions on that one? Okay, the rest is no real numbers, a lot of charts and graphs, so we'll go with that. This one is just a really good one to explain. It is in the budget book, so these have been referenced. This is in your 2022 budget book. It shows you the percentage of the pie of where the money comes from. The left-hand side is a percentage of the pie where the money comes from, and it's kind of hard to see. There is a line right here between the sky blue and the robin's egg blue. Taxes in this case make up a little over a third of the budget, and that includes sales tax, property taxes, and other types of taxes like forest crop tax and some other ones. Then the next area you would have is your intergovernmental grants and intergovernmental charges. Grants are probably the people that have a department that we call government funds, such as social services. Intergovernmental charges would be to departments that run like a business, like the highway department or airport. So that's why to us, the money would still be coming from another government, but it's just the revenue category is defined based on the purpose of your business or your department. And you can see the other areas of that. This was just here to show the proportions. On an annual basis, these don't particularly change much. Taxes and miscellaneous income will change within a percentage or two on an annual basis, and that's really based on how the interest rates and how the investments are doing and how much we've taxed compared to the rest of the amount of revenues that we're generating. On the expenditure side, the really quick thing I want to do is tell you about general government. Makes up the largest percentage, and that's the yellow, followed by transportation. And this also is pretty proportional for each of our budgets in each annual year. So it just kind of tells you where the money comes from and how we're spending it. General government is anybody in this building except the sheriff's department. It would include the CPZ department down on the River Drive, and that's probably pretty much everybody. If you want to think of general government, it's really think of people in this courthouse and think of the CPZ department. The rest of them would be categorized in an activity that actually has a purpose that makes sense. These are just items, again, sales tax revenue. The one thing I did want to show you is that sales tax revenue for the period of 2022 over 2021 through June is only increased 0.4%. Typically, and you can see, I guess this is the first indicator we're saying of where we are concerned about inflation, because it jumped really high in 2021 or 2022, the rose-colored items, and then 2021, 2022 is tracking, but you can see that it's considerably been, the margin has decreased considerably, so we are not anticipating that sales tax will go up, and if so, it will be minimal at best. So that's one of those indicators of where we're concerned about inflation and one of the things that we'd be looking at. With that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the retention data, because we were trying to provide you with some visuals of these new concerns that we have, the inflation and the retention. And again, this isn't just for information only today, but we do have a considerable amount of issues with retention and keeping the employees, and this is in your packet, but we do have people that are leaving at 2 years or less, 5 years, 6 to 10 years, and over 20 years. And at that point, sometimes those would then be retirements, as you see on the pie chart to the bottom. I love pie charts, but even talking about ones, Molly, with people in them are a little hard for me, but yeah. So that's really what we're trying to do, is tell you that this is something we've never seen. So, and then she's got the number of days vacant, and then the chart right here shows you that one of the reasons for them leaving is salary and pay, and that's at 58% of all the employees that do an exit interview. Again, this is a trend line. As we said, we wanted to show you trend lines and why we think these things are concerning, and show you data that we look at and we monitor for these items. That's part of that budget assumption. Instead of just putting them together, we're trying to show you the trends that we're monitoring and that we're concerned about. And this is the one that's showing you that the highest attrition rates are within the sheriff, highway, library, ADRC, and the health department. And we've put them on an annualized basis. And with that, what are we going to have? What do we need you guys to do? What are we putting together? There is a full timeline in this packet, but we're going to come back and talk about a little bit more formal budget assumptions with you. And with that, then the budget goes to the county administrator, and he's going to put a budget together in working with all the departments. That will come back to you October 3rd, and you're going to talk about it, review it. You will again meet on October 12th to talk about and review it. The only stop dead date I have is October 17th. I need to have that to the newspaper because I have to count 15 days out to notify Class 1 notification for the public hearing notice. That happens on November 3rd. That's when the public can come. You don't vote on it, but you see it as a county board, talk about it, and then on November 10th, you would then pass the 2023 annual budget. And that's all I had. If anybody has any questions, otherwise we will be bringing a few more details to you starting in your second meeting in July.
Are there any questions relative to the process and the presentation? Supervisor Hart.
I just had a question, talking with higher gas prices and everything, because we've dealt with that before, like in 2018.
Yep.
I was in high school and I was able to fill up my old Oldsmobile because I didn't have any other bills. But, you know, we've dealt with something like that. How did we deal with that in 2008 and as far as sales tax? And also, like, we have vehicles that have to use that fuel too.
Yeah, we've in the past when we had rising utility costs in the past, sometimes we would be able to do a focus on energy, and we just rolled the focus on energy. I think it's actually in one of the transfers to try to do that. We've got wonderful HVAC people that try to monitor. That's why this room, if it's too cold, maybe they can turn the computer down. Even in your home, we have a Nest, and it tells me how many, days I've been under or over compared to other people that use it. So technology is one item. We do work with the departments when they come in, and they do provide us estimates on what they think the cost will be. We've already been in meetings with the highway department, and I believe infrastructure is met in regards to some planning for their projects in the future due to the higher cost of materials and fuel and those items too. So it's really a conversation between the department and county administrator to try to come up with new ways to take care of that.
Supervisor Hart, part of this is a bad news, good news scenario. The bad news is that we've got these inflationary pressures. The good news, which is really bad news, is that we've got so many vacancies. We've got money within many of the department's budgets to absorb that this year due to those vacancies. And so the impact on the budget is obviously significant, but we have corresponding, if you will, savings or reduced costs due to that vacancy rate.
And that's a really good example, so thank you for bringing that up, because with that flexibility, they already know that they don't have the people, but they have the ability to kind of work within the budget without having to go to contingency or anything else to try to make things work. And we have a really good communication with most of those departments that can say, hey, I can see this is going up, or my, like you said, the filling up your tank with gas was affordable and now it's not, but what can they kind of they try to figure something out. And that's what we like about being able to have some flexibility, because we should hopefully have a few more ways of mitigating that before we have to set that 2023 budget in stone.
Can I offer one thing, Mr.
Oh, boy, that didn't last long.
No, it didn't. Well, I made it 30 minutes is about the longest you've ever seen me not talk. So specifically
I
on
didn't
gas,
do that on purpose either.
I waited 30 minutes. Specifically on gas or fuel costs, it's a great question. And in fact, we're going to be talking about it at exec tomorrow. Trying to anticipate what the budget impact might be even in this year's budget. In the last month, I reached out to each department head and asked for them to categorize the impact of increasing fuel costs on their individual budgets. And to Christie's point, I essentially broke it into 4 categories. And on the far left side, the good side, not a real issue. On the far right side, big issue, and I anticipate needing a transfer from contingency or some outside of their own internal budget source. And I did not have anyone in the far right column yet. So to Christie's point, we watched that during, I mean, quite honestly, that's what you pay Christie and I and all of your department heads to do, is to manage their internal budgets to stay within the parameters you set in the annual budget.
Other questions? Chair Gibbs.
I get more of a comment than a question. I think
I said more of a comment than a question. I think when you look at the sales tax cumulative, last year we had an increase of almost 1.6 million over the 2020 sales tax numbers. But cumulative through June, we're down to a $31,000 increase over 2022 or 2021. And if that trend continues, we're going to probably see a decrease in sales tax in this year. And so when you look at what was budgeted for sales tax and the proximity that we budgeted for sales tax and closeness, you can tell that there will be an impact. But to the other challenge that we have is the recruitment and the amount of recruitment and the vacancies that we have. You know, when you have multiple departments challenged with almost not quite 10% of the workforce that we're recruiting for, that frees up dollars, but it also limits the capacity.
Supervisor Baker.
So on the equalized value in that new construction slide, we've recently taken on more debt than we had before. So do we expect that to have an impact on the debt levy? Because I see it's 0.0016 and that doesn't change in the future. So would we expect that to go up?
Yes, I use rough estimates that it's level debt until we take a look and reschedule it. That's why we haven't brought all the debt. Yes, it will go up most likely. That's why we haven't brought the actual debt assumptions and all the actual revenue assumptions. This is just what happens if the base number is here.
Thank you.
We're trying to figure out where the noise is coming from. All right, so there's the process overview. Any other questions? And we've got the 2023 budget assumptions. That was all in there. And then we've got a review of ARPA project request timeline. Not that quick, but this was something that we talked about last year, and we really, I don't know that we ever formalized it, but we were looking at how do we process the request for ARPA funding within the context of our county board action, because any request for the expenditure requires a 2/3 vote of the county board. And we had we'll use the word tranche of request that came in that we had presentations on. We're now starting to accumulate a second grouping of requests that we will be looking at for the county board in later this year. And I think this gives the public an opportunity to understand when we will review and consider their request. Everything that comes in is not necessarily automatically approved. It goes through some evaluation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Administrator Leonard, is there anything that you want to add relative to phase 1, phase 2, and then subsequent applications?
No, thank you.
All right, any questions on that timeline? Kurt?
Are you looking for a motion to approve the ARPA funding request timeline that, by this committee?
It's educational. I think I'd ask that question of whether like we will use that as sort of the driving factor for us. So because it's educational, we can't take action on it today. All right. Next will be operational functions, discussion and possible action on the Village of Edgar tax deed parcel 2014-7. And we have the clerk from the Village of Edgar present, if you'd like to come up.
I put that little microphone out.
Or,
Yep.
Oh, perfect. I guess it doesn't really matter. I don't know if you can all hear me. Hi, my name is Jenny Lopez. I am the village administrator for the Village of Edgar. And you guys had recently put some property out on a tax deed sale on the county website, and that sparked some interest in the village. We had some folks call with some questions, and when we actually took a look at that, we realized that one of the parcels that you have listed for sale is actually 30 feet of our Maple Street. So we were a little concerned, and I had talked to Kim, and she was gracious enough to be able to put me on the agenda so that we could come and chat with you. We tried to do a little bit of research as to how it got to this point, because it really wasn't something, it didn't generate a tax bill since it had been in the county's name. And I've been an employee with the Village of Edgar now for just over 4 years. And we had never really stumbled across it. So as we looked at it, we all kind of raised an eyebrow and thought, wow, I wonder how this happened. From what we were learning, and maybe an assumption that we have that I'm not sure if it is a fact, but we believe that Edgar Land Company was the kind of founder of Edgar. They came in and they're the ones who kind of started the municipality there. It was a lumber company. And I think that was, as I learned, and actually Audrey, when she was the treasurer, had helped us on some other parcels kind of similar to this. What we learned then is after the turn of the century, when they were exiting the community, they had already done what they were going to do there, and they were transferring it over to the property owners or the business owners in Edgar. We think that some of these pieces were just maybe not recorded correctly when they got down to the courthouse, and likely this one, and I'm not for sure because I don't know, I guess, the timeline of when Maple Street was actually put in as a road, but it looks like just by the size of them that maybe they were road right-of-ways, or maybe they were just with the meets and bounds description forgotten pieces. So I did bring a few pictures just to kind of show you what we're talking about. I know there are some pictures in the packet that are a little bit hard to see, but I'll maybe just pass these down. And then I went and actually took a picture of how it looks today just to show you that it is an improved road. Our goal is certainly that you don't sell it on us. Yeah, right. We did hear that there was some folks interested in maybe mining some gold on it, so that would be kind of a unique, interesting activity, I guess, to have done on it. But anyway, I guess, I don't know what the resolution for sure would be, aside from we're hopeful that we could get that deeded back to the village so that it makes sense. Otherwise, our road would be 30 feet less right there.
So I've had some discussions with the Corporation Council. The concerns that I have is that because this was a tax parcel, we bought the tax roll each and every year, and we paid the village taxes. In the county had, we paid for the school tax, the county, or for the school tax, the village tax, NTC tax. So what amount did we pay, and again, this is a long time ago, but the village was a recipient. They used it for a road, should have been a right-of-way, should have been off the tax rolls, but we kept it on the tax rolls because we rely on the local units of government to establish that ownership. Do we have an idea of what our payments were? And I don't have a problem with transferring it back, but I think that there's the issue of the village and our, basically got value in leaving it on the tax rolls at our expense with it not being paid. Mike, do you have a number?
It looks like in the packet that the total amount of taxes at the time the tax deed was taken on the property, and that was back in 2013, I believe, was $102.08.
All right, what are the wishes of the Chair Gibbs?
Well, the 102 would be for the 1 year, correct? And then, there's a portion of the 102 that is paid to the school district, a portion of the 102 goes to the county, portion of the 102 goes to the Village of Edgar. We make all of those municipalities, other municipalities and or entities whole, since we were holding that parcel and in county ownership. So I understand, Mr. Chairman, you're looking to try to figure out what was the cost to the taxpayers of the 102.08, and then obviously that number changes every year up until the current date. And I don't know, has anybody calculated that? I don't. I guess I would look to Christie if she has calculated that or not. Okay.
I guess the principle is one thing, and the reality is it's a relatively low amount. So I just raise that as a concern because I would hope that we would clean these up wherever they're found, and I'm amazed that it got that far on the county, even the county side where we put it up for sale, because when you look at the documentation, it kind of hits you right in the face because it's so obvious that it's a right-of-way and that it should have been transferred at some time long time ago, because it was a right-of-way for quite some time. So the question is does the committee desire to just quick claim deed it? Do we want to transfer it with conditions? What are your wishes? Or are there any questions? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have any other examples or precedent of this happening? Like the two options you just listed, I mean, are there more recent examples of taking these actions?
I'll look to the Corp Council.
I would say, thankfully, no. I haven't run into this issue before, and I don't recall it in the last 6 years that I've been monitoring this type of issue. I can't recall it at all.
Chair Gibbs.
So the only question I would have is to Corp Counsel, is there any legal precedent that we're setting by transferring this if we're not going to recover the costs that the county has paid out?
That's a good question. So under your ordinances, section 3.20 of the county's ordinances, subsection 8 indicates that we are allowed to sell tax delinquent property to municipalities, and that section says that the county may agree to sell tax delinquent property at private sale to municipality under the following terms. unpaid general property taxes, special assessments, special charges, and special taxes levied against the property, including interest and penalties, or the appraised value of the property, whichever is less. When I read that ordinance, it indicates that the county may agree to sell under those terms. I think the county is open to authorizing a sale under either of those terms, whichever is less. The precedent that could be created if we sell it for, or if we quit claim deed it without a sale is, my concern would be we're technically violating that ordinance because we've already taken the property by tax deed.
Chair Gibbs.
Obviously, if we took it by tax deed, who did we take it from? That's, I guess, the interesting question that I'm posing is, who did we take it from?
I was thinking the same thing. I don't know that answer. Because that road has been there before 2014,
Exactly.
right in front of the Badger Basket Factory, which has been there for a lot of years.
So in other words, did the Badger Basket Factory have title to that property? Do we even know the answer to the question?
I believe not. One of my board members is a longtime employee there because I had then sent this and the other one that you have listed in Edgar to her to show them, and they're not interested in it because of course it's the road, but they had absolutely no knowledge of it.
And as part of the tax deed sales process, the village would have had to have been notified and asked if they were interested in purchasing the property before we even listed it for public sale.
Interesting.
So the village would have had to have signed off that they were not interested at that time. So I know, it's a little bit crazy.
That is a little interesting. Yeah, that's before my time, so I don't have an
Mine
answer
too.
for that.
The transaction screen that was conducted by the Health Department indicates that the property was owned by Roger Wozniak. So the question is whether we notified people properly, and I'm not sure how he would have been involved if it was adjacent to the basket company. So maybe what we need to do in light of our ordinances is do a little bit more research on this and then bring it back at our next meeting. Is there an objection to proceeding that way so we can clarify it? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we postpone action and have Corp Counsel do a little more research as to options that we have on the disposition of this parcel based on our ordinance.
I need some direction to remove it from the website for public sale.
And also
So that we don't get
direct
bids.
clerk to remove this from public sale because it is clearly the village's road.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Leahy. So the motion is to defer action or postpone action on the resolution and request direct the Corp Counsel to conduct additional research relative to our options under the ordinance and to withdraw the property from the tax deed sale process at this time. Is that correct?
Also incumbent in that is to actually identify the dollars that we reimburse.
And to establish or to determine the amount that was paid to the village. Any discussion? Corey?
I just wanted to know if the village, is there any need to have this property to the village right now, or is it okay if we wait? I just want to make sure it's, I don't know what the,
We don't have road closed signs on it or anything like that. So no, we just realized it was a error. I mean, I'm assuming some type of an administrative error at some point. I'm not sure. So I guess as long as you're okay with us continuing operation as current, there's no problem. And I too can do a little more research. We were kind of perusing through our files. None of my board members knew anything about it. But we weren't really putting our finger on anything. So I did see that Wozniak name, but that's not even a familiar name to me. So I can ask a few more questions on my side too. And toll booth, yeah, probably wouldn't make a lot, but.
All right, any other discussion on the motion? If not, all is in favor of the motion to postpone and direct staff to come up with additional information relative to options and cost and to withdraw it from the tax deed sale process. Now, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We understand your conundrum, so
All right,
thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I don't know that there's a need for you necessarily to be here. We'll try to get the information in advance at the next meeting, so thank you. All right, discussion and possible action by committee to forward to the county board for consideration, I'm sorry, approval of claims and question cost before we get there. That was mailed or emailed last week. Are there any questions or motions? Supervisor Hart. A motion by Hart to approve, seconded by Gibbs. Any discussion? Not all is in favor of approval of the claims and question costs will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next is discussion on possible action by the committee on 2022 intergovernmental budget transfers. Christie, is there anything you'd like to add, highlight?
There's a grant approval resolution and the associated budget transfer with the dollars are in the budget transfer. So it's kind of a duplicate, but two different functions.
I think for the purposes of discussion today, we'll act on the keys separately and deal with the other intergovernmental transfers. Any discussion or motions, questions, or motions? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion to approve the budget transfer of the public safety federal grant of $4,500 in the sheriff's department and move to the full board for its consideration.
Is there a second? Second by Leahy. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, next we'll go on to amend the budget to accept grant funds for the Family Keys pilot project. And Vicki, my understanding is that you will give us a presentation on that grant. Before we do that, do we need to do the transfer, the intergovernmental transfer? It was specific to the public safety grant, but there's the budget transfer authorization form for finance as it relates to the other capital
Yep,
projects.
I would need you to do, those just stay here because they're already approved in a budget, so it's carry forwards.
As you're coming up, we'll deal with that issue, so
Yep.
keep coming up. What are your wishes relative to the other interdepartmental transfers? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion to approve the other, the finance interdepartmental transfer of $22,661,303 in the finance department.
And there's CPZ and sheriff in addition to that in
Okay,
there.
and CPZ and the sheriff.
Is there a second? So, second by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all is in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Sorry. Now.
All right, thank you very much, Chair and supervisors here today.
Oh, sorry. I don't know. There's the microphone. Thank you. Thank you. My name's Christy Keel, and I am currently the chair of the Marathon County Department of Social Services Board. I've been in that role for the last 2 years, have been on the board for 5. In practice, I'm an attorney, and I represented kids in foster care for 15 years, so as a guardian ad litem. So my experience in this is not just as being on the board, it's also in my expertise of what I've done in my past professional career. So today we're going to try to give you a little bit of a high-level presentation, given that there'll be more detail for the county board level, but we want to talk a little bit. I'm going to start by speaking on some of the mandates that the Department of Social Services and the county are required to do in child and protective care cases. Which will give you some insight into why this grant, the benefits of the grant, and what those are. So Chapter 48 is what we call the Children's Code, and that is related to all cases in which a child comes into protective custody. And the main thing in those cases is to look at the best interest of the child, whether it be a born child or unborn child, which we'll talk about briefly in a minute. The Department of Social Services is responsible for that child, providing that care from child maltreatment reports, court jurisdiction, and in-home services when the child is placed, as well as necessary preventative services before a child were to be placed in care. So it is something that is mandated by law, and it's something that Marathon County cannot deny any of these services when they come to our way, or deny any based on lack of funding. So there are 3 different types of abuse under the statute in Wisconsin, and there's physical abuse, which is oftentimes something like lacerations, broken bones, something that causes serious harm to a child but is not done by accidental means. This can also include unborn children. So in the case of habitual drug abuse or alcohol during a pregnancy, a child can come into protective custody at that time. There is also sexual abuse, which is sexual contact or intercourse. This also includes pornography, prostitution, trafficking, and various forms of sexual abuse as well. And finally, the most common case is neglect. So this is when a parent or guardian refuses or is unable to provide necessary care, food, clothing, medical, dental care, housing, shelter, and it's going to put the child in danger. This, in my experience, this was most of the cases that I was that I was placed on in Marathon County. Here we go. If the child is deemed unsafe by the department, they're given hold on one second. I wanted to make sure. I don't think I addressed the amount of cases that came in. So we get about 1,592 cases were reported for maltreatment in 2021. Out of those cases, 516 cases were screened in. And what that means is that they'll assess whether or not it's going to meet the standards of those statutes, or whether or not the child is going to be unsafe if stayed in the home or with the presence of the parent. And those mandatory reporters can be anyone from teachers, law enforcement, therapists, medical personnel, or any other concerned person in the county. So when we look at this, if it rises to the level of the statute, then if the child is deemed unsafe, the Child Welfare Agency then has to ensure their safety. Federal and state laws require all in-home efforts to be done first. So that's preventative services. And you'll hear in a minute why that's even more required now. Unless safety cannot be assured. And then at that time, the Department of Social Service will make a referral for a petition to be filed with the court. And in all out-of-home cases, whether or not a child came into care, was placed out of the home, the number one role of the department is to assess and provide reasonable efforts in reunifying that family at all costs. So during that process, when they come into court, they're given a list of court-ordered services. And there's many that become standard and are all on every case. And they can be housing, parenting, education, having a job or an income. Those are often on every case. But then there are others that are case by case that the judge will order, whether or not there's alcohol and other drugs use, and then they would have also some mental health evaluation or counseling. So those are other things. They also are required to give visitation. So one of the standards in a family court order, or in a child and protective court order, is for safe and adequate housing. There are many different types of out-of-home placement. We call it from least restrictive to most restrictive. So we start looking at relatives first. That would be the least restrictive setting of placement out of the home. Then there could be foster homes. That would be the next least restrictive. A group home is a placement if a child is in need of some more services and more required supervision. And then finally, residential treatment, which is the most restrictive and also the most costly, would be in the cases of where the safety of the child is not able to be provided in any least restrictive setting. So in 2022, the budget for out-of-home care in Marathon County was just over, you can see, $5 million. At this point, I know in the time that I've been on the board, we've worked hard Vicki has worked hard and her staff to get that budget down, and is very conservative in their numbers. And we look to about 60% of that funding comes in as state and federal dollars, and 40% at this time is county levy. If the expenses exceed, for unknown circumstances, like for instance during the opiate crisis, where there were more placements, placements of children out of home care, they might exceed an state allocation, and then the county levy would be the other required funding source at that time. So in 2018, there was bipartisan legislation at the federal level called Family First Prevention Act. That was signed into law to look at, based on the fact that research shows that a placement out of the home or family separation is a trauma to a child. And so they are now putting more funding into preventative services and placement back in home services. So anything that can prevent an out-of-home placement or can increase a placement in the home sooner rather than later. So child welfare agencies all over the country are looking for new ways of working with children, working with families, trying to lessen the amount of placements and lessen the amount of days that a child is placed out of the home, but to do that safely. So that is where this Family Keys comes into play. While we're looking at all of these different ways that we can lessen the costs, but also the benefit of the child being placed back in the home, we look at many different things that are barriers, and one particular barrier in Marathon County especially is housing. So you'll hear from Vicki in a minute that, oftentimes in these cases, you might meet every single goal that you have, but the one remaining barrier is whether or not you have adequate housing. And so that's really where Family Keys comes in. So I'll give it to Vicki.
Perfect. All right, thank you, Christy. All right. And I'm the Director of Social Services, for those who don't know me. So I'm going to talk at, a high level of Family Keys, what our opportunity is. It's a two-phase project, which I'm going to give a little bit more detail on in the next couple of slides. But both of the phases have to do with assisting child welfare families, so meaning families that are open to us for services. We're working with them. And Child Protective Services is an involuntary service program, which means that families are not signing up to work with us in Child Protective Services. Sometimes they are receiving services that benefit them, obviously, but they are also under our supervision and oversight, and the oversight of the Children's Court, which is not desirable for families, as one can imagine. So just to clarify that, these are involuntary services that families are participating in. At the end of the day, The target population that we're talking about for phase one, which is our $327,000 grant that we're requesting to be able to accept, are for families who have successfully met their court-ordered conditions. They're determined to be safe caregivers through our social work safety evaluations, but they are unable to access safe and adequate housing for the return of their children to their care. In other words, that's the only barrier, otherwise their children would be returned to them. This results in longer out-of-home care placements, meaning both the state and the federal government state government, and county are having an increased financial obligation to continue to pay for kids in out-of-home care. And of course, that's a poor result to children's well-being. So our vision of success as our overall project is to have adequate and safe housing for all families, so that lack of such is never a reason why parents cannot care for their children. The goals of Family Keys is to lead a demonstration project with 2 other counties, specifically La Crosse and Wood County, with the support of the State Department of Children and Families, that will address that barrier of having housing for families that are under the jurisdiction of the Children's Court, and learn what works well, what works best, maybe what doesn't work in one particular jurisdiction but could work in another one, all in preparation to be ready for Family First as it is rolling out and our funding will change. And so at the end of the day, our goal is less out-of-home care days. So we're going to focus on phase one in terms of the project that we're talking about today. We were, as part of this demonstration project, we were asked to propose a project that could provide housing to families who qualify for it immediately, meaning like July, August, like that immediately. And they're families that in our community, as I mentioned, are ready to have their children back. They've done everything they need to do to satisfy the court order, and they are determined to be safe caregivers. And the only reason they don't have their children is because they don't have safe and adequate housing. So that is where we got together with our partners who have expertise in housing programs to develop the program that we're talking about today. It's important to put that in context with the overall project. So the second phase of the project is a longer-term opportunity to work with our partners through year 2025 to be able to pilot something else or demonstrate something else based on what is learned over time. And that's where we have the ability to include other partners. And there's been conversations and questions asked about our private partners and private organizations that maybe wish to be involved in supporting this population in housing. That's a really exciting thing to know, that there would be others that would come to the table. That would be the opportunity to do that in phase two, where we have more time to plan and more ability to figure out what another project would look like for a long-term basis. What I need to emphasize is that if we do not move forward with acceptance of the grant for phase one, we will not be eligible to continue in the overall grant, and then we lose that opportunity for phase two as well. So our project, and this again was the immediate needs grant request for phase one, is looking at transitional housing for child welfare families. That was selected as being our optimal program at this point, in part because individual housing units are not accessible for our families. And so to find a location where they could live together and receive services together, and again, be able to have all of their barriers to be addressed, to be able to get more permanent housing. That is the goal. Whenever we return children to their parents, we stay involved, and the court order remains in effect for at least a year. In some cases, it's extended for various reasons, but for at least a year. And this gives us an opportunity then to support those families in that transitional housing so that we can assist with that reunification of the child and, again, address any barriers that the families would have. The grant is for $327,000 over a 2-year period that would include the rent, utility furnishings, insurance, et cetera. There is a more detailed plan that was included in your packet in terms of the actual budget, which includes a case management position that would be available to help the families find that permanent housing. So our social workers would remain involved with these families, as well as potentially our family support specialists who provide parent education. But in addition, if we have the ability through the grant to be able to contract for a person who would have some experience in being able to work with those families to identify their particular barriers to help them get to a more permanent situation. The families will then gain experience in their tenancy with the living situation, and hopefully be able to have a more positive reference to move forward for more permanent housing and an ability to save some funds for them to be able to do that. So again, our target date is as soon as the county board would approve acceptance of the grant, and the money is available to us at this point. So these are our partners that are listed, and again, for just phase one, if we are accepted and move into the long-term part of the grant, this partner list will grow, which is why that is saying the more to come if we participate in the project. So in conclusion, our Family Keys supports our county work. When we look at a trauma-informed perspective, we know that it's best for children to remain in the home of their parents or to be returned to their parents as soon as possible. And I can tell you from my 35 years of experience working with children that children want to be with their parents, even when they're in the most horrendous situations. They want to be returned. It's traumatic for children to be removed from the care of their parents. When they are unsafe and we are unable to address the safety of children in their parental home, we must remove. But we're always looking to be able to support and remedy that situation so we can reunite families whenever possible. If it's not possible, we need to move on to another option such as termination of parental rights and adoption. But in all cases, we want to try to make that effort because the child belongs with their birth families. The federal money that is currently supporting the child welfare expenses is shifting from reimbursement. Currently, that comes from out-of-home care placements to earlier prevention or intervention. So we will have less money available for federal match, which will mean increased levy if we don't change how we're providing our services. The project is one-time federal funding that was provided to all states to help states to prepare for Family First and to pilot programs, because if we didn't need to do anything differently than we're doing right now, we would have the same result right now. So we need to figure out what is going to be able to work better for families in keeping them together in the community. And so we are able to do this by lowering our county cost and actually state cost for foster home placements during the cycle of the 2-year grant. So this is our return on investment for phase one. So this is the projections to save out-of-home care placement dollars. So this would be the foster care dollars, just the foster care dollars on this first section. And I need to clarify that we looked at more current data compared to our last presentation we did to the Health and Human Services Committee when we're looking at what the annual savings would be. At that point, I was looking at 2021 data of summary of kids in foster care in 2021. So to prepare for this with more detail for your committee, we looked at our information on year to date. So this is through May 22 of the kids. We have the mix of kids that we have in foster care right now because those would be the children that would be eligible for this program with their families. So this is the more current recent data. And our overall costs have gone up in terms of our foster home rate from 2021 for 2 reasons. One is there was an increase in foster care reimbursement overall that the state provided. And also this would just show us that the acuity or the need overall of our kids in care is higher. So foster parents receive a supplement for children's behavior that is more challenging and that would need more of their time and attention. So that's where our mix is of kids right now, and that's where that asterisk is. So for 2 years, that would be a total cost savings of $168,444. Again, that would be a mix of state, federal, and county levy. At the end of the day, we're also going to save system time that is very hard for me to come up with a number on, but our families that were able to reunite and then are not going to enter the child welfare system with supportive services will reduce court time, and our courts are extremely backed up, so that will be a huge savings there, as well as attorney time across the board, but including our county corporation counsel office. The long-term savings of the phase 1 and phase 2 is to be determined. I've been asked to put a number on that, and I've shared I really can't do that at this point because we haven't even been able to accept the money and get the program going. So for me to be able to project what that savings is, I wouldn't be able to do that other than to say that with our experience that we have in child welfare and with all of our partners in the housing programs, that we are confident that we will see some significant improvements here. The impact to children and families, we can't put a number on that. We can't put dollars on that. It's immeasurable to families in terms of not being separated from their children and from their children being reunited with their parents. Reduced trauma caused by family separation, and this, of course, would be supportive of Objective 3.3 of the strategic plan in terms of reducing overall trauma to children. And this was the 2-page paper that we provided for more information on specifics. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Chair Gibbs, then
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vicki, I've been asked this question multiple times. I know we've had 516 cases that, we had almost 1,600 cases referred in 2021, and then 516 cases that we've, open cases on, I think. Do we know how many children in those 516 cases were actually then effectively taken from their parents for some period of time?
Yes. And Mike, do you have that number on the top of your head? Because those would all be. Yeah, we have our overall kids in placement, but if we wanted to just look at the court petitions that occurred in 2021, that would probably match that better.
In 2021, there would have been 128 separate court petitions filed.
Chair Gibbs.
Follow up on that is each petition is a petition only for each child, or, okay, so if the family has multiple children, that there's a petition for each child. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Hart.
Yeah, so I serve on the Social Services Board. Vicki onboarded me onto that right away, and there were two things that were her priorities. It was employees. They deal with really traumatic stuff, so I know you do a great job on that. Part of that also is trusting the experts and the employees in this department, and I know you've worked very hard on this. The other thing that you mentioned on our first meeting was providing services that are mandated in an innovative way in order to drive down the cost, because this is expensive stuff, and that is what this program is doing. So I just wanted to give my support. So it's not really a question, it's just a comment of everything that I've been involved with social services and talking with Vicki and Christy. This is a really great program, and I want to urge us all to support it.
Other questions, comments, or motions? Supervisor Lemmer.
I too support this. Coming from the teaching profession, I know the trauma on kids that are separated and just dealing with family things. I do have some questions that I'm just going to kind of throw them out one at a time if I could. If this phase 1 is successful, how is the funding found for phase 2?
So if our phase 1 is successful, it's possible that the state could designate additional funding to replicate this across the state. So there's that possibility, because that's the overall takeaway of this demonstration project, is for the state to replicate what works across the rest of the state. So it's possible that the state could provide some funding. It's possible that if we find it successful within our own budget, we could reduce our out-of-home care costs and be able to pay for this program instead, for example. It's also possible we could apply for foundation funding for different grant type things. But it's really unknown at this point, and what I've already said to the board and committees is that we're not asking for additional levy for this program, and won't ask for additional levy for this once it's completed, because if it works, we will see savings.
And then my other question is related to that a little bit. You said La Crosse, Wood, and Marathon County were 3 counties that were, is this all the same? Is Family Keys the same in the other 2 counties as well, or are they doing a separate program?
Great question. So phase 1 is different for every county. Phase 1 was meant to ask each of the counties what would work well for them right now, meaning like July, August. So each of the counties has a different priority and a different need and just a different situation to be able to address. Phase 2, in moving forward to 2025, we'll all be working together to design what that would look like.
Okay, and last question. Thank you so much for your information. When I look at the detail of the 2-year costs that are on the proposed budget assumptions, the rent is $139,200. Over 24 months, it sounds like it's like $5,800 rent just for the rent. Can you tell me a little bit about the facility and why it's so high? Because I don't pay that on my, monthly, so it just seems like a big number.
It's a large facility that, again, in your packet, I think there's more detail about that it would have 11 bedrooms and two separate distinct areas of the building, as well as some office space for our staff and for service providers who will come in and provide services so it's a very, very large setting, if that helps to answer your question.
Are there any other questions, comments, or motions? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make the motion to approve to amend the 2022 budget to accept the grant funds for the Family Keys pilot project.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. All right, the next item is policy issues for discussion and possible action, consideration of the ARPA project submissions previously discussed by the committee. And, from the original list, we've had some projects fall off. We have some others in the hopper, but we're going to look at those that are before us today and make a recommendation to the county board. I would like to just point out that relative to the approved projects, we did receive good news through the Public Service Commission broadband grant, access grant process in both the Bug Tussle and the Frontier projects were funded. We have a match and a loan commitment associated with those that will use most of the money that we have set aside for them. We will need to formalize our agreements with those 2 companies, but it will result in 636 businesses and residents being served by Bug Tussle and 10,000, I think 422, don't hold me to the exact numbers, for Frontier throughout the county. So that's a good news. We still have some work to do in that area. We've never had that large of a grant, but we're leveraging significant investments by both of those companies, in addition to capturing the broadband grant from the state. We've had a chance to look at the request, and I'd like to just throw out a concept. When we're evaluating these, I think we need to look at a number of factors, including how does it relate to our strategic plan, proportionality, and does the money invested proportionally benefit the residents of the county, which is one of the federal ones, consistency with the federal guidelines. We put the criteria, return on investment, other partners, other things. In discussing this with the administration, that one of the thoughts that we had was to take those capital projects and run those through the same capital review process in budget process that we would run any other capital projects through, and have those come in at the budget time. That would give us the ability to look at those in the context of our long-term spending, our capital projects, and overall relationship of those projects to others. In addition, we have a process by which we evaluate requests for new staff. And the thought was that we would run those staffing requests, particularly the one from the DA's office for the grant-funded position and a new position relative to, well, their request through that similar process. And then we would consider the other items today. Anything you would like to add?
I'll just add one other kind of thought that occurred to me, and as the chair referenced, this approach, it makes sense to me for one additional reason, and it's kind of alludes to the slides you saw from Christie and that Molly put together relative to people. You can fund a lot of projects and put a lot of money towards getting a lot of things done. We need to have the people and the project managers to get them done. And the 5-year capital plan process and your annual budget process essentially brings those two pieces together. The funding strategy along with the kind of human capital strategy of what can you move through a cycle in a given year. And there's a lot of projects on that list, and I think it makes logical sense to me when the chair suggested that approach. I think that makes logical sense. So that's the only other thing I would add.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, we have processes in place and so to take them out of the process that we normally utilize sets up us potentially for multiple challenges that we haven't thought of. And so I would be clearly supportive of applying each of the following programs to either the CIP process, capital improvement process, and referring it through those processes, and or the increased staffing support process, and those would be the digital lab, forensics lab, the jail property and person scanner, the courthouse duct cleaning, the fire department communication alerting upgrade, the juvenile detention air handler and duct cleaning, the library duct cleaning, the DA office staffing, the DA's office remodel, the library third floor training area remodel, the taser replacement, the Big O Plain Park project, the Dells of the Eau Claire project, the 9 Mile renovation project, and the Sheriff's Office Training Center. So that would be my motion, is to refer those to administration and through the CIP and or staffing increase process.
Is there a second to that motion? Can we get a second first? Second by Supervisor Lumber. Now Supervisor Hart.
I wanted to know then what is still in here with all of that.
So what would be left would be that we would be dealing with, if the motion were to pass, would be the Village of Marathon City Business District Project, the Fenwood Creek Pilot Project, the City of Mosinee Window Replacement Project, the North Central Healthcare Remodel Cost Increase Project, the Highway Department Infrastructure 4-year Transportation Plan Enhancements, and the Regional Forensic Science Center request.
So is there any discussion on that motion? Chair Gibbs.
The other thing that this can do, as we have always seen in our CIP process, is if those projects go through the CIP process, we've identified, not only have we identified the capital needs for those projects, we've identified the capital in human need to complete those projects. So also in that would be identifying whether or not the ARPA funding could effectively pay for these projects. So it's not circumventing anything, it's running it through the CIP process, and potentially, if they go through there, they would be available to be funded with potentially ARPA funding.
All right, any discussion on that motion? Supervisor Baker.
What would be the time frame for the CIP process? When would that be completed?
It'd be run concurrent with the budget process, so you would have a presentation of preliminary KIP in August, September, and then it would be adopted as part of the November project, as part of the. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. And we have a number of remaining projects that we need to look at. And again, you know, the committee, the previous committee, and we can't bind this board to others, but we looked at factors, you know, such as what percentage of the project is funded by ARPA, is there collaboration with other communities, matching funds, is this one-time funding, long-term impact on the budget, operating costs, sustainability, alignment with the Marathon County strategic plan and goals, program deliverables and population served. Does this target a primary disadvantaged group, percentage of the population impacted? What are the deliverables outcomes? How will the deliverables be met? Who's responsible for keeping program commitments, return on investment, economic impact, and its relationship to both the federal rules and the pandemic. So those are factors that we would look at. So do you want to deal with those one by one? And by taking our action today, it does not mean that we necessarily cannot consider them in the future. But I think we're charged with allocating the resources by December 31st of 2024 and ensuring that those dollars are spent by December 31st of 2026. So I think that's one of the reasons why the administrator and us in Chair Gibbs and I felt as if it was important to get a better understanding. We heard from the City of Milwaukee at the Wisconsin Counties Association about their concerns about their ability to complete projects. So if you don't complete them, you lose the money. So I think that there's a need to build those into a realistic timeline and expectations, and to also look at those to make sure that we're not carrying over ongoing obligations beyond the project. So with that in mind, what are your wishes with the projects? I don't know if you want to handle them one at a time, the remaining ones. I'm seeing nods. So should we start with the Marathon City North Business Park request for funding? Supervisor Hart.
So I was actually thinking of putting these into categories because I see them all in categories. The first one would be something along the lines of projects that are brought before us because they were directly in result of COVID or COVID impacts. So the example would be North Central Healthcare, that project that is being impacted by inflation and rise in construction costs, the DA staffing using to backlog the courts that had to close down during COVID, and then a second category for COVID mitigation, and also anything that kind of we learned out of COVID. So the example would be like the Parks Department, that in increase in those usage, they want to use those projects, you know, to support that. And then a third category for everything else, because we do see that there are items in these project requests that kind of aren't anything, don't have anything to do with funding. It's just because the the funding is available, and why not apply for it if it's there. The other part of all of this is I don't know where we stand, you know, in taking in more requests, but I want to see more, because, and I guess maybe my understanding of where this can go isn't that good, but I want to see more, you know, can we give money to small businesses that request it? Can we give money to nonprofits? You know, where can we go with this funding? And I kind of want to see more diversity. I know that our county government obviously is our priority. Municipalities get their own funding, but I want to see where else we can provide this. This is really an economic stimulus for our community. I want to use that in that way.
All right, to address the categories, I think that makes sense, but we just moved a number of the projects that you discussed into the budget process for us to do and to look at through that, the DA staffing and others. So we have to have a proposal for us to respond to it. And I know that there are some significant unmet needs that have not yet been identified. North Central Healthcare, Behavioral Health Services is still trying to get their arms around lost revenue associated with the operations due to the COVID pandemic. We're anticipating we'll see a request in the foreseeable future, but behavioral health is a critical need and was one of those specifically earmarked in the federal legislation. So we know that we will be seeing a request in the future. The problem is that we're dealing with these based upon requests to us. And I think you raised the point of, do we commit all the resources now, or do we save some for the future? Chair Gibbs, you were.
No, I was just going to comment, you know, there clearly I serve as the chair on the North Central Community Services Program Board, or NCHC, and they're trying to finalize and understand, you know, obviously COVID has had a significant impact on the ability to deliver those services, not only in the nursing home, but in the mental health services programs. And the lost revenue is fairly significant there. You know, we've seen one portion of that request right now, and that is the increased cost on the renovation project down there. That's what we have before us today. But we're going to see at some point in the very, very near future, you know, a budget, if you will, reconciliation for the 2022 NCHC budget, and then also potential for ongoing costs. But so, you know, I would caution us before we start allocating all of those dollars that that is as a direct impact by COVID on services that we're required to provide.
And I'm also aware that Supervisor Baker has a proposal relative to the vehicle registration fee to suspend that for a period of time. That would have a significant impact on our reserves. Supervisor Baker.
I would ask that Administrator Leonard and Christie comment on, we have, as Christie mentioned, we have a lot of uncertainties in our budget for next year. And Administrator Leonard has said that the departments are in good shape for this year, for the most part. But what do we think the impact will be next year? Do we need, I mean, this COVID money, I mean, this ARPA money is for COVID impacts. I think that some of what we're seeing is due to after effect of COVID. So do we think that we should be saving some of this, you know, should we be keeping some of this set aside for impacts for next year's budget?
I can comment on the discrete question you just said. Yes, you should keep some of that money to deal with effects of lost revenue and just governmental pressures. And you do have flexibility under the lost revenue calculation. The slides we saw about employee retention and attraction, they are real. And I've said it before to this committee, and I said it yesterday at Public Safety when Chief Deputy Bill talked about the challenges they're having recruiting in corrections. You saw the slide where we talked about, I'll go back up, I can do that, I'm sitting right up here. The vacancy numbers by department and overall percentage. Next slide. Sheriff's Office, the attrition data by department, 18% of total staff. You'll see the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department, 71%. We have people that, for a wide variety of reasons, and you see it in every segment of the economy, that are moving about, whether they are retiring, taking new jobs. Many people are, as Christy alluded to in the presentation about flexibility, there are a lot of people that are looking to work remotely for a wide variety of reasons. I've talked to this subordinate bodies of this board about childcare. And it's not some great idea that your administrator has had about, hey, maybe childcare is really an important thing. As is often the case, I'm one of the latter people to come to the table on issues. That's everywhere else. The local Chamber of Commerce has highlighted that as a real need for employers, that they need to be really looking at how can they address these issues. So there's a lot of issues that, to your point, your specific point, Supervisor Baker, it's well put. Should we retain some of that, some of those funds to address issues that we know are coming? The class compensation study, I've said that a number of times. Yes. I speak with colleagues around the state of Wisconsin at least every week. We have a round table where we share challenges and game plan how we might address them. A neighboring county, or I should say a county in our region, provided recently a 9% across the board salary increase. 9% across the board salary increase for Marathon County is $3.5 million of tax levy. So unfortunately, I don't have $3.5 million of tax levy unless Christy can tell me otherwise, where it's just waiting to be spent. We're not allowed to do that. So yes, we need to have some reserves.
But I just want to urge a little bit of caution when we start looking at rolling the ARPA funds into our operating budget, is that we have life beyond ARPA. And given the fact that we have levy limits, some of the toughest levy limits in the country, we need to be able to retain our employees beyond December 31st of 2026. And so we need to keep in mind that we can look at lost revenue as filling some holes, but they should be the one-time or temporary problems, not long-term problems. If we build the base off of with ARPA funding, we're creating a big hole we'll not be able to dig out of in the future.
If I could just add one thing, I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that's one of the benefits of having some of these capital projects go through the capital planning process. Kind of that idea of how are ongoing operational costs impacted by a capital project. That's one of the considerations that we're going to look at. Is how does the spending that each of these projects are proposing, how does that impact our ongoing operational costs? Because Chair Robinson is absolutely right. This was a little bit of endorphins. The money was a lot of energy into Marathon County. It was a lot of energy into the entire country. But we have to have a plan that's sustainable.
Christy?
You actually had just said the same thing. We have one-time money, which we don't use to continue to fund ongoing operations. But if we can stimulate using the ARPA to churn those increases back down over a 2 to 3 year period, then it's an investment to get us into a better direction so that we can manage those retention numbers. So we see it as our flexibility we're asking for. If we can use it to come up with a way to do something that can turn the indicators around, then I think it's appropriate. But in general, such as Chair Robinson said, you walk a fine line using one-time money to fund long-term operations, but it is prudent to use it to change your indicators so that you can get it back on trend.
Other questions? So Supervisor Hart suggested that we look at creating some categories. So why don't we try that? Categories that were impacted by COVID. That would be specifically the North Central Healthcare cost increase because of supply side issues. I think we're seeing that all over. What are your wishes relative to that item? Supervisor Hart.
So with that in mind, it would be the North Central Healthcare. That would be, I think out of the projects that are still here, that would be the only one that would meet that standard.
Yes. So do we want to advance that to the county board? And again, once we advance it, the action today is a recommendation on the part of this committee to the full county board. It will require a 2/3 vote of the county board to approve. So what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we support and move to the full county board funding the North Central Healthcare remodel cost increases due to COVID because obviously, well, I'll leave it at that at this point, and then I'll have an additional discussion.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all of those in favor will signify by saying, oh, I'm sorry, Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, just to follow up, obviously, previous board has approved, and we're in the middle of a huge renovation at North Central Healthcare. There's been discussion, or at least comments by the full board, that we look at downsizing some of that remodel to generate some cost savings and not utilize the additional requirements that this request has added. I can tell you that our facilities people have done everything that they can to try to minimize the impacts that the cost increase has been on the construction project as a whole. They have cut to the bare bones in some cases, some of those remodel projects in some certain cases. So I fully support funding that. You don't get into the middle of your house remodel and then decide not to finish it. It's be like putting half a roof on your house. You just don't do it. I think we need to finish the project that we have. It is a sound project. Thank you.
Any discussion on that item? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. You then said those that were aimed at COVID mitigation. The proposals don't have any. Supervisor Lambert?
Well, I looked back at my notes, and I thought that the Regional Forensic Science Center project had to do with the morgue.
Yes.
And because of that, I mean, we did have quite a bit of dying during COVID, and a need was discovered with, we could be kind of, I think what Christy was talking about, some stimulus for the future. It was a revenue, possibly revenue based. So I feel like that would be one that would fit under the COVID.
So is that a motion?
Sure.
Is that a motion to advance the regional morgue to the board? Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Chair Gibbs, and I have a comment.
And I do support the project. What the one caveat that I would put in here is, obviously the increased cost has been reevaluated, and we put in, and we are working with the governor or with the senator and looking for the state to assist in some of that capital costs. So I would offer a potential amendment, and that would be that the $2 million would be set aside and would be contingent on or set in that sinking fund until potentially December of 2023. If we do not receive the remaining cost through the budget of the state and or an appropriation to assist in paying for the other side of the cost of that facility, that $2 million roll back into ARPA and be reallocated to additional projects.
There's an amendment. Is there a second to the amendment? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the amendment to sunset that allocation? If not, if we don't have the match from the state, through the state of Wisconsin back into the ARPA fund on December 31st of 2023. Any discussion? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you. Just wondering when we would have updated information about this partnership with the state.
I think there's two possibilities. I think one is Senator Petrusky is still looking at potentially this year having some discussion, but I would say that no later than the budget, the biennium budget that is adopted by July of next year.
Any discussion on the amendment? If not, all is in favor of adopting the amendment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Now the motion is amended, designating funding for the regional morgue subject to receiving a commitment from the state by December 31st of 2023. Any discussion? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, and I just wanted to concur with Supervisor Lemmer that was the other project that I was thinking, because yeah, we experienced, I mean, we had the coroner come here and say that we got close to that level, but you know, that's the project that I had in mind when I thought of COVID mitigation and anything that we can do to help our county, you know, deal with something if that were, God forbid, to happen again. And also, you know, the other benefits of having that morgue here.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Then we're into the everything else category. Chair Gibbs.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First off, one of the projects that remain is the Highway 4-year transportation plan enhancements. And those also are contingent on awards of additional funding. In other words, all of those projects is the dollars that we're allocating is 20 cents on a dollar. The remainder, 80 cents, is coming from federal funding and or state funding that is passed through. So to me, this clearly makes sense that we utilize something similar to what I just proposed for the remodel or the forensic center, and that is we should know sooner or later whether or not we're successful on some of those grant plans on those transportation projects. So I would move to support utilizing ARPA, allocating ARPA to leverage the additional 80 cents on a dollar on, or effectively on the remaining projects. So allocate it, but it is also a sinking fund.
Is there a date in which time that reverts back to the ARPA fund?
Yeah, I don't have that date, available right now.
We can move on that, and we can look at trying to modify that at a later date. But
that would be my suggestion too.
Is there a second? So that is Motion for $10,337,879. Is that your motion? Consistent with the request? And it was seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? Any discussion? This is an opportunity fund, if you will. If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right, now we have the remainder. We have Mosinee, Marathon City, and Fenwood. Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. So this is the part where I would say that with these ones, I would like to know if there's an immediate need for any of these to need funding right this second. If not, I would say that if we could see if we could solicit more applications to see what else we could fund within the community, that would fall into that other category. But that's me kind of going out on a limb. I don't know how the committee.
So is that a motion to defer action on those three requests pending review and consideration of additional requests
Yes.
as part of the next round? Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Leahy. Any discussion on that? Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not against postponing action on this, but I think, in some cases, one of the critical questions that was asked, and I want to extend a sincere thank you to Supervisor Baker for asking the question, was, is the project going to be funded or if the ARPA funding wasn't provided? And I think some of those answers to at least one of the projects was, yes, that project would still go forward, that being the Village of Marathon City Business Park project. That was going to go forward regardless of whether Marathon County added to the $1 million request. Now, to be honest and fair, I think that really sets up a challenge if we were to fund that project. Every other municipality in that has a TIF district could make the same argument. So I don't believe that this is scalable, that project. I think we also, I think in some cases, owe a definitive answer to some of these requesters, and postponing it may effectively delay when the thought that they may be receiving some funding. So I would be in favor of looking at the Village of Marathon project and the City of Mosinee project and the Fenwood project and saying, I don't believe that they fit the criteria. They're not scalable. They're not, especially the Fenwood Creek project. I don't see it scalable. The other thing that was brought to my attention was every one of the vast majority of the conservation practices that are voluntary and put in place by our conservation department has a 20% participation rate. This one was told to be requires an 80% participation rate. I don't know how we didn't hear anything that says that the participation rate in the Fenwood Creek is going to increase to 80% because it's clearly voluntary. It is not required. It is the individuals in that project are meeting state standards. And the same is true with the City of Mosinee project, and that is, I don't see that as being COVID related. It's a request for funding. The City of Mosinee, just like the Village of Marathon, receives its own funding, own ARPA funding. And so I would offer amendment that we to the motion to deny moving those three projects forward.
The motion is to replace the word defer with deny. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Supervisor Baker.
I would ask Chair Gibbs if it would, I believe that the City of Mosinee is actually a Marathon County Library project. Does that impact your decision?
The fact that we are a tenant in that library does not affect the impact of that. It's again, as a tenant in a home, if you're renting a home, are you asked to pay for your remodel of your windows? Unless it was rent, no. So I would say that doesn't change my decision, even though we are a tenant in that property.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Lemmer?
And according to my notes, they thought they could go to a not-for-profit to help out if the funding was denied, so I think they have a plan B.
I'd just like to reinforce some of the comments that Chair Gibbs made. The Fenwood Creek, while it's a notable goal, my concern is proportionality, sustainability, and effectiveness. I think that if you looked at 3.1 million over the life of the project, and you're assuming an 80% participation rate, if all of the farmers came in, we would be subsidizing those at a tune of about $55,000 per farm in that watershed to do basically what they should be doing as best practices and good sound management of the soils and their farm. And so if we were to apply this countywide, we don't have the funds to do it. And what happens at the end of the period if we've got this dependency? And I think it creates expectations that are not sustainable. And there may be other approaches that we may want to look at. Not that the goals are wrong. I think the method is wrong. And again, the Marathon City, the Village of Marathon City Industrial Park creates a precedent. I think that one of the things that we should ask the EEEDC to do is to clarify what the county's role should be in these industrial park expansions. We've not played favorites before. We are a partner when they create the tax increment finance district. We lose the revenue from that district associated with the growth that goes in to pay for the infrastructure improvements. So we already have skin in the game relative to that project. Chair Gibbs.
Just one other, and then just reinforce what Chair you said, and that is, we do have a significant, in this case, skin in the game in that TIF district out there, because literally that TIF district is just been extended by an additional 8 years, and so right now, as I understand it, the vast majority of the infrastructure is fully funded right now. But because they want to expand the project, now they're extending the TIF another 8 years. So Marathon County is putting in additional dollars in TIF money that is going to assist in the development of that TIF, as we do in any TIF. If it's a TIF that's successful.
Any questions on the amendment? Chair or Supervisor Hart?
Thank you. And it's not so much a question, it's with the Fenwood watershed, and I support that. The question is the scalability, and it's more because, so say this program is successful, in the presentation, I know that they mentioned that they would think that the state's going to fund it. I have serious doubts that our state legislature would fund that project. I would love them to, but I don't think they're going to. So I really want to support that, but I too, I think it could be successful. I just don't think it's gonna make it outside of Marathon County.
All right, so the amendment is to change the word defer to deny. Any discussion on that amendment? If not, all is in favor of the approval of the amendment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. The question now is adoption as amended. Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question now that we've denied a few of the requests is it the
We haven't denied them yet.
Oh, sorry, that's on the table. My only question is it the jurisdiction of this committee, or should it be to perhaps better advertise the ARPA situation, the money that we have? You know, we saw a majority of departmental, government entities make the request for this money, which makes sense. They knew it existed more than anyone else. So if we want to see a diversity in requests and we want this to be a more far-reaching avenue of support, what does that look like for this committee? Thank you.
We save that for a discussion later and vote on the motion as amended. And then we'll come back to that. And what are your wishes relative to the motion? Any other discussion? Supervisor Hart?
I just want to know what the motion is right now on the table.
Deny. So the amendment was to change the word defer to deny. Now we're voting on the motion as amended to deny. So all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no?
Aye.
That was a aye.
Yes, it's an aye, sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any opposed? That carries. In light of the fact that we haven't noticed it properly, I will put that on the agenda for the next meeting, and we can have that discussion on what we can do relative to the rollout. And for the new members, we did have 3 public hearings on the use of the ARPA funds. Supervisor Baker was there as a citizen, providing comments to it. And I think we could look at that, but we can place that on an upcoming agenda to discuss encouraging public participation. Chair Gibbs.
Yes, and I'll just I'll highlight what this committee has done at this point. You know, we've allocated previously we've allocated roughly $5 million, 3 of which is for broadband that we found out that we were successful on some broadband grants. We now just approved almost an additional 20 million, well, excuse me, an additional 13 million. Is my math right? Roughly 13 million? 10 for the 15 million. So 15 million, excuse me, 15 million on top of 5 million that was already previously allocated. So, and we know that we have a huge responsibility on the operations at North Central Healthcare. So just so everybody's clear, you know, if you were to take out whatever number you want to North Central Healthcare, and the estimate right now is there's about a $4 million deficit in operations for 2022. They are working on, with the new management, they're working on trying to close that deficit. And I think they're doing a amicable job, but there's, you know, we have an ultimate responsibility to deliver those services and pay those pay those employees down there. So we cannot be in neglect to understand that we don't have a significant amount of ARPA funding left if we were to put some kind of dollar out of the 26 million that we have total. We've allocated 20 already, and an additional amount for NCHC.
Supervisor Leahy.
Okay, but to confirm, about 12 million of that we did pass with contingency. So we are potentially looking at a universe where at a certain date that rolls back and we would be having another one of these ARPA processes again. Okay, thanks.
We have requests that have come in already relative to that. Supervisor Baker has one. The town of Mosinee has another. My understanding is that there's some coming in through the Hmong Chamber of Commerce and others, and so we've got others that are in the works. Chair Gibbs.
And also understand that just by moving all of those projects that were ARPA funding requests to the CIP process does not negate that the CIP might be a funding source for some of those projects, so.
I think as part of our discussion at that future meeting, we're going to have a tracking mechanism in, and we're going to have to revisit all of the earmarks or allocations. One of the set-asides for broadband was a loan for bug tussle. We don't know if we can do that through the ARPA program. If not, we need to then look at freeing up that money and making it available for others. If the highway projects aren't funded, we need to be quick again because we've got 2 timelines, and if we don't meet those timelines, we lose the money. So we'll have to have that discussion of how do we do outreach, how do we track, how do we adjust, how do we engage the community in this discussion. Supervisor Hart.
And in that vein, I just wanted to request that for the next meeting, we get an updated kind of chart of all of this, because I know we've been crossing things off and putting new things on, and it would be very helpful to see where we're standing, especially so we can get good math together and know exactly how much money still needs to be allocated.
Good suggestions, good discussion. Thank you. The next meeting is July 26th. At that time, we will talk about the strategic plan and our role, although we don't have any specific tasks that we are the lead on. We have involvement in many. I would also like to get a little bit more seriously into our discussion of our work plan. We can follow up on the ARPA. What are the committee priorities? And I know that there are some other normal functions. I know that we have had a request from McDevco to do a presentation to us relative to the services that they provide. We'll look at having them come in at that meeting as well. Are there other items that you would like at subsequent meetings? If not, that invitation is always there. If you'd like to have items come in, let me know. Adjournment. Moved by Gibbs, seconded by Lemmer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Thank you all.